week 3 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few quarterbacks I would look to start this week. The first guy is Jaylen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Jaylen Hurts in week 2, he didn't have that great of a fantasy day, obviously, like he did at week 1 at Atlanta, where in week 1 he had 264 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, and 62 yards rushing. In week 2 versus a stout San Francisco 49er team, 190 passing yards, 10 rushing attempts, 82 rushing yards, and a touchdown. So right here in week 3, it's an NFC East showdown with the Dallas Cowboys and the Eagles in Dallas on Monday Night Football. And right here, I think this ball game is going to be a shootout. I think Jaylen Hurts is going to have a bigger fantasy day than he did in week 2 here. And right now, the Dallas Cowboys, they really can't stop anyone on defense. So right here, I think Hurts, he could rush for anywhere from 60 to 80 yards, have 2 total touchdowns, and hit about 200 to 250 passing yards in this one. The next quarterback I would start this week is Kirk Cousins of the Minnesota Vikings. So far, the first 2 weeks of the season here, Kirk Cousins has been in mid-season form and a good quarterback for the Vikings in fantasy, even though the Vikings are tough luck 0-2 so far. So week 1 at Cincinnati, 351 and 2 touchdowns. And then in week 2 at Arizona, 244 and 3 touchdowns. And he added 35 yards rushing was Kirk Cousins. So here in week 3, it's going to be another shootout, in my opinion, between the Seattle Seahawks and the Minnesota Vikings. And Kirk Cousins, he's a guy that has a lot of weapons, like I mentioned. Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, Dalvin Cook, and KJ Osborne, who's been emerging over the last couple weeks here to start the season. So right here, I think Cousins has a good game, and he's a quarterback I could start with confidence this week versus Seattle. The next quarterback I look to start this week's Ryan Tannehill of the Tennessee Titans. So Tannehill, so far, it's been pretty mediocre to poor ball games for fantasy owners of Ryan Tannehill. Week 1 versus Arizona, 212 passing yards and a rushing touchdown and an interception with 17 rushing yards. And then in week 2 at Seattle, 347 passing yards and 27 yards rushing with a fumble loss. So he didn't throw a touchdown in that game at Seattle. And it was all about Derrick Henry in that one, where he went off for a huge fantasy day, was Henry. But here in week 3, he versus a division foe that obviously he knows very well in the Indianapolis Colts. And the Colts, they haven't stopped anyone so far in the first 2 weeks of the season. And I think this is the week Ryan Tannehill turns things around and has a big fantasy day here, where he's going to get Julio Jones and A.J. Brown involved here. And I think he could go for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns in this one. The next quarterback I look to start this week is Derek Carr of the Las Vegas Raiders. So far, Carr's put on a show in the first 2 weeks of the season. Week 1 versus Baltimore on that Monday Night Thriller, 435 passing yards, 2 touchdowns and an into. And week 2 at Pittsburgh, a very good defense, especially in Pittsburgh, 382 and 2 touchdowns. I know his ankle's banged up here for week 3 versus Miami, but he's a quarterback that definitely could go out there and get the job done, in my opinion, even if he's not 100% right here. Carr's taking shots. He's hitting guys deep. He's got one of the best tight ends in the league in Darren Waller. And right now, I think he's going to get the job done here, is Derek Carr. And this week, if he's going to play, obviously, he's definitely a recommended start. And the 5th and final quarterback I would look to start this week is Matthew Stafford of the Los Angeles Rams. So Stafford, the first 2 weeks of the season with his new team, he's been pretty solid, and they're 2-0 as well. Here is the Rams. In week 1 versus Chicago, 321 and 3 touchdowns. In week 2 at Indianapolis, 278 and 2 passing touchdowns with an interception. So here in week 3, it's going to be a shootout versus Tampa Bay. And obviously the Rams, in my opinion, like it was week 1 for the Tampa Bay Bucks versus the Dallas Cowboys, where both teams had big fantasy days from Brady and Dak Prescott. And I expect more the same here from Stafford in this one, especially if Darrell Henderson can't go in this game. They're going to throw the ball a lot, in my opinion, 40 or 50 times in this game. And I think Stafford, once again, hits the 300-yard mark or comes close with a few touchdowns. So that's a few quarterbacks I would start here in week 3 of the fantasy football season.